Good Friday morning, everyone, and welcome to another Friday Flannel panel. I am Mike Ongstad, and of course, pleased to be joined by, once again, Joel Searby, RAM National Political Director. How are you doing this Friday, Joel?
I can't believe it's Friday. That was a quick week full of a lot of things. But I got one thing going for me, which is that I color coordinated our flannels this morning.
Yeah, it's uncanny, but it's a good look. It's good fall colors, even though we're straight in the winter. So, Joel, obviously, yesterday, big anniversary, January 6th. I think this is one of those days where many Americans will always kind of think back and remember where they were, what they were doing when it happened. So it's one of these moments and commemorations that is tough to watch. I remember seeing it live when it happened and just being so angry at what I was watching, and seeing it all again in the recap, it just brings back those feelings and those emotions. Do you have a similar experience?
Yeah, mine was slightly different in the sense that I was not surprised that it was happening. I've been in this democratic, pro-democracy fight for a long time, as you have, Mike, and unfortunately felt that what we saw on January 6th was really the natural culmination of what a lot of very radical and untrue narratives brought us to. And so I, at the time, was on about a 3-month break, which ended up being about an 8-month break from politics. And so, in that moment, it was a little bit jarring in the sense that I had tried to disconnect from the day-to-day of politics, but there was no way that you could do anything but watch and mourn and be frustrated and angry, disappointed, worried. But for me, it was less a shock and more of I think for me, a stealing moment, if you will, that really got me back on the track of wanting to re-engage in politics. And 6 months later, I joined RAM. So here we are.
Yeah, I think that's one thing is you're right. It was obvious that this was where it was heading, and yet I think a lot of us, myself included, wanted to believe what I'd been told by 100 or so Republican friends 1,000 times, which was it'll never actually go that far. It wouldn't actually do that. There are enough safeguards in place. It wouldn't work anyway. So to see it actually manifested, to see those safeguards come within inches of being completely smashed, or to rest, a major constitutional crisis to rest on the shoulders of one man, Mike Pence. It was eye-opening, and I think, and correct me if you think differently, but I think that's why we saw so many people, including Kevin McCarthy, come out immediately and take strong positions. I think they too had that, head in the sand. It's not going to happen. It couldn't happen. It wouldn't go that far. Yada, yada, yada. And they were shocked out of that denialism, and made those statements. Kevin McCarthy saying the blame rested entirely on Trump.
Yeah, Mike, I think that's a really important point. And for those who may be listening, who are wondering, how do I get involved? What can I do? What is there to do if I'm now feeling this way? Many of us, again, have felt this way for quite some time, that there is a real threat to our democracy. But I am somewhat sympathetic, or at least understanding, to those who maybe stayed in the establishment or in the inside workings for a long time. They believed what was happening was a problem. They saw it, but they kept their head down, hoping they could do some good. That's a different category of people than those who know exactly what's happening and choose to say otherwise, which is where I get really angry. You talked about anger. My anger has come more recently as I've been every day talking to members of Congress directly, as well as their staffs. And other than about 3 or 4 people that in the House, particularly, that are true believers in the big lie, the rest of those Republicans know and will say privately over and over and over that they know that the election was legitimate and that Donald Trump is destructive and corrosive, and yet they choose to do nothing. Now, back to your point about head in the sand and eye-opening moments and shock. I think what we've seen, and our good friend Evan McMullen has a way of talking about this, that everyone's on their own journey to discover the threats that we're facing. What I'm seeing now is those who have more recently kind of decided or realized or otherwise felt the urgency of this pro-democracy fight are now in that fear and concern stage. And that includes people who maybe left the Trump administration late, but were in for most of it. Those who maybe have recently resigned from office or are facing, needing to leave a staff of a Republican, et cetera. Many of us, we already went through the bridge burning and mourning phase when we kind of decided we needed to stand up. But I would say to those who may be watching who are just recently saying, okay, this is really, really dangerous. I got to leave the party, or I need to do something more about this. Welcome to the family. And there's lots to do. We've got to beat back some of these radical candidates, these baseless lies and the ideas that are being spouted. And so, I think that's one of the things that our movement needs to be doing, is to welcome people, whether that's people like Stephanie Grisham, who was reported yesterday is in conversations about, future looking ways that ex-Trump officials can fight back against this. Some of those folks stayed in until the very end. And, I say to them, you're welcome, because we need everyone stepping up and fighting against these anti-democratic forces.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the more the merrier. And I think, those kind of politicos and campaign people and staff people are critical of this fight. But I think, you hit on something important, and that is there's a lot of people who probably voted for Trump in 2021 who then saw what happened on January 6th and realized this is not somebody they can support. And those people, the voters, are critical in that effort. So it's interesting. I do like the way Evan talks about it. Everyone taking a different journey. It's a very good way of describing this process. And so that's a good segue into the first thing I really want to talk about, which is, we saw yesterday Joe Biden, and I watched his speech live, giving a speech, and it was the speech that anytime anyone asks me, how could you have voted for Joe Biden? How could you, a lifelong Republican, have voted for Joe Biden? I'm just going to point to that speech, because for me, it vindicated having voted for him. And I think for a lot of people who might have even voted for Trump, he laid out a contrast in that speech. It was an excellent speech of what a president should have looked like. And in some ways, it's a speech that should have been given 1 year ago by Donald Trump, but something that is so evident in retrospect that Trump is not only incapable of delivering, but has absolutely no desire to deliver this rapturous defense of democracy and the right to self-government. Mm-hmm. And so it was just stark for me. And I hope a lot of Americans watching it, people who are not hardcore partisans, people who maybe, waffle between parties based on the candidates they like or don't like, saw that and it clicked, maybe subconsciously or maybe directly in front of them. Like, oh yeah, this is what a president is supposed to say about democracy.
Mike, I think that's right. And I would say to those who may be listening who are conservatives, Republicans, I'm a conservative independent myself, who are concerned about the direction of the country under the Democrats or may have disagreements. I'm with you. And I continue to have concerns about many areas of both the president's leadership and the direction of the Democrats. However, when the house is on fire and your loved ones are inside, you don't stand next to the arsonist and cheer on the fact that he lit the fire. You run to the firefighters and you put it out and you get the people out of the building whom you love, whether they agree with you or not. And that's what Biden was calling us to, I believe, and drawing that contrast. And the thing that we can do is, we're here to put these fires out, and that takes a lot of different forms, but we cannot allow ourselves to be aligned with those who lit the fire in an intentional, knowing way, in a way that is tearing down our democracy and destroying the foundations of everything that we believe in. And I'm willing to stand next to the firefighter, hold the hose, run into the building, even if the firefighter's a socialist. My goodness. I mean, you're going to watch people that you love burn, or are you going to do something about it? And we're going to do something about it.
Yeah, I mean, the greatest virtue of democracy is not that it always gets it right. It's that you always have an opportunity to change course. And
Mhm.
that's what I think a lot of people don't understand. And another, aphorism that I like to say is you should never give yourself any power that you wouldn't give to your worst enemy. And when you look at, the attempt to overthrow an election to instill Trump unconstitutionally as a president in a second term, and you look at, if you hate what Joe Biden's doing, right? If you hate how the economy is going, if you think he's failed at COVID, at testing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it's all the more reason why you need to defend and support democracy, right? Because without democracy, Joe Biden, someone like Bernie Sanders, whoever could be unconstitutionally maintained as president, right? And it's something that I think too many people get wrapped up in the immediate of, like, I must win this fight, whatever issue, abortion, communism, socialism, whatever. I must win this fight right now, and I must strike the ultimate decisive victory. Not realizing that the power to do that gives your opponent the power to strike an ultimate decisive victory against you. And so it just, I think it's fair, and I think it's actually a good thing to criticize Biden and how a lot of things are going down, but his steadfast defense of democracy makes that more important than any singular policy issue that he's ever going to be behind or advancing. Because without democracy, there's no change in course from him or from anyone else.
Yeah, well, and I think one of the things that we hear often from within those who support Trump is that they believe, and I think some of them earnestly, that they too are defending democracy. They think that, but what I think they're really saying is that they're defending a set of policies and a way of looking at the world that they prefer. That is not the same as defending the foundations of democracy. What I believe is happening is that as Republicans, particularly those of ill will and those who I think know exactly what they're doing, they are undermining the foundations of the trust in the institutions, particularly through the big lie, which they may actually get to if they were to, let's just say, reelect Donald Trump and take back the House. They may get to enact some of those policies they're talking about when they say they're defending democracy. But what they're not going to do is actually defend democracy. They're going to enter into a period in our nation's history where the trust is completely eroded, has been abused, perhaps criminally stolen and taken. And at that point, they've gotten maybe what they thought they wanted, but we've lost what we really need, which is democracy. And I think we've all just got to be very clear-eyed about what we're talking about when we use certain terms. And again, I think particularly to those who are Republicans and conservatives and who are trying to navigate these waters. Now, I don't think anybody who is a QAnon subscriber is, number one, listening to this, nor cares what I say. But I'm thinking primarily of the 30% of Republicans who do not believe Donald Trump should be the next president, who are ready for something different. And there's a lot of media time given to the 70% approval that Trump still has among the Republican Party. Fair enough. That's a problem. 70% who believe the big lie. Huge problem. There's 30% of Republicans who don't believe the big lie. And we're talking about tens of millions of people in this country. And of course, we know that, a few thousand can cause an historic moment, as we saw on January 6th. So I continue to have optimism and hope and faith that among those tens of millions of both Republicans, conservatives, independents, centrist Democrats, that we're actually a huge number of the American electorate, and we need to stand up and do what's right in the cycle. And that's what we're here for. That's what Renew America movement is here to do, is to give those people a voice and to hopefully give some guidance into how to vote and where to vote and where things matter this cycle.
Absolutely. And, to your point, I see something very typical in the Republican response to Joe Biden's speech and to January 6th commemoration events writ large. And that is this argument of you're just politicizing this event in order to divide Americans, right? So they're co-opting into many ways our language, right? We talk about the dividers who are out there who are dividing Americans, and they say, well, you're just dividing Americans. You're just trying to keep us apart. And it's a strategy that's actually intended to divide Americans even more, right? It's designed to take that 30% in the electorate, and then the handful of 14 or so elected Republicans out there, and say, you need to be on this side of the line, because what they're really trying to do is hurt you, right? And so it's this way to try and consolidate all the support, while also giving cover to the real radical extremists, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Matt Gaetzes, who they held a ridiculous press conference basically trying to take a victory lap and got no pushback from Kevin McCarthy or Mitch McConnell. So it's that attempt to say, oh, you're politicizing this, you're just being divisive, and so we shouldn't listen to you anyway. And by the way, you 30% come back into the fold, because we're the only ones looking out for you. They're trying to hate on you. And I thought Joe Biden, I don't know if you saw this, after his speech, he answered this exact question from a reporter, and it was perhaps a more insightful thing than anything he even said in his speech. They said, why can't you just let the country heal? And he said, you can't heal if you won't recognize the wound. Mm-hmm. And so much in his speech was focused on the big lie, and without ever mentioning Trump. He did mention the former president, I think I saw 16 times, but he focused on the wound, and the wounds, were three essential lies that helped facilitate that day. The biggest one being that the election was rigged and stolen, which we know is not true. And I thought Biden was really dead on when he took that question, which is kind of a gotcha. Aren't you just dividing? Isn't this just dividing more Americans? And made the right statement. You don't heal. You don't have a big cut on your head and just go, if I ignore it, it'll go away. You treat it, you acknowledge it, and sometimes that means inflicting a little bit more pain on yourself to clean it out, to suture it, etc. And the people who say, why are you being so divisive? What they're really trying to avoid is a little pain.
Yeah, I think that's right. And, it's not just a medical truth. It's a psychological, emotional, and spiritual truth that we have to deal with the reality of what is causing pain in order to actually heal from it. So certainly, I think he's tapped into a deep human truth on that front. I think also, there's, first of all, a little insider baseball. This is a classic Republican tactic. I was a Republican consultant for 13 years. We did two things. We called it attacking the attacker. So when someone would call you out on something, you would just attack them for something totally separate in order to divert the attention from the real problem, particularly if it was a real problem. And the second thing is, particularly in the high levels of Republican leadership, and McCarthy and McConnell are absolutely guilty of this. There is a mentality, particularly among the political class, the leadership, that you're just supposed to ignore radical people and just don't give them any oxygen, and don't amplify their message by taking them on, because you should just ignore them and stay focused on core issues of personal freedom and the economy, etc. 10 years ago, I might have been okay with that, but we're in a space right now where the way the media landscape works, and the social media landscape particularly, it doesn't matter if you ignore them; they're going to be amplified. And so I think it's incumbent on leaders to call it out, to speak against it, and they're not doing it. And I think it's really a problem, and it has undermined the credibility of people like Mitch McConnell, who certainly much more than Kevin McCarthy had a long history of very respected leadership. And yet, his reputation is really being sullied among some very important people, and I think rightly so.
Yeah, and I think the perfect example of what you're talking about is Louis Gohmert. I worked on Capitol Hill back in mid to late 2000s, and as a staffer, we sometimes would tune into what was lovingly called Gohmert Hour, where he would take just kind of open time on the House floor when they weren't doing anything, and he would just rant about crazy things. The kind of the most notorious and famous one is terror babies. I don't know if you remember the terror babies, but he was petrified that basically terrorists were going to have babies in the U.S. and raise like a sleeper cell of terror babies in the U.S. But it was almost, I mean, it was almost treated as like endearing, like, oh, here's this crazy old kook. He's like the weirdo in our weird uncle, and it's kind of funny when he goes on his little rants. Well, ignoring Louis Gohmert and Steve King, although eventually he did get finally evicted because he went too far. But Louis Gohmert is now a right-wing celebrity in white nationalist circles, in paramilitary circles, and in QAnon and election conspiracy circles. Mm-hmm. And it's not just Louis Gohmert, it's MTG, it's Boebert, it's Gates. Those ranks are growing, in part because we treated the Louis Gohmerts as just, kind of funny sideshows, rather than treating them with any seriousness. And now they've gotten so large and so powerful that to your point, Republicans accused Joe Biden of politicizing an event and being divisive. And then MTG and Gates give a press conference where they essentially they say, I'm not celebrating the violence, but I'm going to walk the halls where patriots stood, celebrating what happened, and crickets, because they can't criticize them. And I just want to bring in, one thing that the New American Movement is doing, coming forward, is a project called Rise of the Radicals, and you should stay tuned for more of that information. But we're going to be compiling and following and documenting radical and extremist candidates across the country in 2022, who are, many of whom, some of them are kind of famous names, but many of them are kind of obscure figures who live and are running in districts or states where it's stacked heavily in their favor. So we are more likely than not to see this radical wing grow in 2022, especially if we don't recognize the wound and say this is an infection. We're likely to see that grow, and that little wing that for so long we've said, oh, they're just kind of weirdos out there, it's okay, we can ignore them, they're benign. No, it's malignant, and it's gonna get bigger.
Yeah, and no doubt. And it's going to take all of us. There's a good question from one of our viewers, and just for those watching, we're streamed across Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, so you can watch us on a number of platforms. But from Matt about working with Adam Kinzinger and his group, Country First, we're in touch with all those folks. I just texted with Adam yesterday, and we're working with this ecosystem of pro-democracy forces. Adam released a statement, I think 2 or 3 days ago, that he'll be working to try to help protect great Republicans in primaries against those kind of radicals that Mike's talking about. There's a number of other groups that I consider friends and allies. So this isn't about, protecting our pro-democracy little fiefdom or territory. We need to work together in order to not only bring light to these radical candidates, which is what the Rise of the Radicals is about. I think Mike's going to talk more about that in a bit, but also to take them on wherever we can. I do agree with you, Mike. I greatly fear the number of candidates that are going to win, unfortunately, easily, who subscribe to all of these really dangerous and untrue conspiracy theories and really problematic views.
Yeah, absolutely.
One comment I want to make real quick, going back a little bit, because I think it's important to just balance the conversation. Of course, there is a whole bunch of politicization and a bit of a sideshow on the Republican side. I have to say, because I'm an equal opportunity offender, while I think Biden's speech and the way the White House handled this was really quite excellent, I think the Democrats in the House absolutely blew it. They played right into every stereotype. They had some kind of Hamilton sing-along. It just felt it was exactly what they were being accused of, which is, let's make this a political spectacle. Instead of something that should have been very somber and deeply thoughtful, I think it turned into a very stereotypical Democratic political rally. And then I'm hearing about, a number of other things at the statewide level and even at the local level that kind of some of the pro-democracy and Democratic groups were doing. And I'm thinking, this is very tone deaf as to what really needs to happen, which is that we need to build this cross-partisan coalition that really is this large group of people, tens of millions, in the middle. And I don't mean the political middle necessarily. I mean kind of the thoughtful, rational, emotionally stable middle that says, we have to retake, a sane approach to protecting our democracy. And we don't need a rah-rah show on the left or the right. We need, thoughtful, somber, hardworking approaches to making sure that we're, electing great people and unelecting those who don't need to be representing us.
Yeah, I'll note. I mean, I saw that too, and it's just like, you had one job, right? You had one job. Treat this like the serious occasion that it is, and don't bring levity to it. Like, it's not the time. It's like, like in the year after Pearl Harbor, being like, and now a nice Broadway rendition from Annie. It's like no. This was an attack. This was an attempt to overthrow democracy. And look, I love Hamilton, and a lot of people don't. I love Hamilton. I don't want to see it at something like this. I don't need to hear from Lin-Manuel Miranda. He has nothing to tell me about the strength of our democracy. And that's not a dig at him. It's just a simple truth. I want to hear from reasoned, serious leaders who are going to tell me what we're going to do, how we're going to fix it, and to give that rallying cry for why we have to unite around this central focused idea. And yeah, Biden hit that nail right on the head.
Yeah. And, one of the things that was glaringly missing, and it's been commented by many, many people, was I think there was an opportunity, and I'll call out, some of our allies here. There was an opportunity for a number of thoughtful, principled Republicans to stand next to thoughtful, principled Democrats and stand up and say, we're not giving up. We're not going to allow the narrative of polarization to be the only narrative. And there may have been some little blips, but I do think that was a missed opportunity. And one that we at Renew America are standing steadfastly for, which is, if you're a Democrat, if you're a Republican, if you're an independent, you are welcome to join us, because our mission is united by, what we call our principles for American renewal, which you can find at our website and are pretty hard to disagree with, but it gives a centering a way of thinking about how we can go beyond kind of traditional partisan frameworks.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like even in this particular case, it's even more important to have that cross-partisan approach to the issue of January 6th, because a lot of people catch a lot of flack for comparing January 6th to 9/11 or to Pearl Harbor. They're completely different things by degree, but we need to instill in Americans the notion that this was, if not on the scale of death and destruction, a comparable attack, on the scale of existential threat to the country, it belongs up there in the highest, in the category of the worst attacks on our democracy. When you're attacked by an outside faction, that's easy, right? Terrorists attacked us on 9/11. Everyone in America is united against them. You saw a huge, swelling of unity and togetherness in the aftermath. Bombing of Pearl Harbor, we had the Axis powers as an enemy, huge rallying support behind the war effort. This is a civil attack. This was hardcore partisans, extremist radicals, paramilitary groups coming together to try and overthrow our democracy. And they represent a fraction of 0.5% of Republican voters. I mean, really, we got to stress that. A lot of people, even people who believe in the big lie, are never going to pick up a weapon or buy a plane ticket and try to storm a Capitol building, because that's not something that they would do. But there are people who would, and the problem is they're identified with that party and with a charismatic leader who still wants to maintain control. And as a result, they're dragging the whole party behind that effort, either as a tacit acceptance of what they did, or at least as a willful refusal to condemn it, because it would be too painful to the party to do so. And so, unifying that cross-partisan coalition is harder in this instance than it would be in any other circumstance. And it's more important that what the way we talk about this, what we do, is be seen as cross-partisan. And I think the area where Renew America is really poised to do good work by bringing Democrats, independents, third party, Republicans, former Republicans, everyone under the sun together under the principles that you mentioned, one of which chiefly is democracy, and standing up and saying this was an attack. It's an existential threat to our Constitution and to our democracy, and we need to remember that, and we need to take steps to ensure that neither party, no party, any party, third party, someone without a party can ever do anything like that again.
Yeah. Well, and let's just remind folks of how we're doing that. I think it's important, as we get into the nuts and bolts of what we're doing, which is to support those candidates, particularly incumbents in the House, both Republicans and Democrats, who have stood up and been pro-democracy voices, have been bridge-building voices across the partisan aisle, and have stood up, importantly for our organization, against the big lie and for these principles that Mike was just talking about. And while we try not to have litmus tests in terms of ideology, we do have some litmus tests in terms of what you're willing to say and do and what votes you've taken. And so, we look at, for example, Republicans in the House, which is a very scarce number. Unfortunately, we had another viewer question about this, but there are a few who have stood firm and steadfast, and they have to walk a very fine line. Because they're still trying to win Republican primaries in some cases. So you have folks like Peter Meyer and Fred Upton in Michigan, and Jamie Herrera Butler and Dan Newhouse in Washington, Tom Rice in South Carolina, and a number of others as well who are in our renewers list, who are really trying. I really believe they are. I've spoken with almost all of them personally, and have been in regular touch with them. But I'm sensitive to the fact that they have a very difficult task ahead in their primaries. And so, we need good Republicans, and those who are in open primary states can vote in primaries. We need you to support these Republicans, because while you may say, well, they might support McCarthy, or they might, they're Republicans, the Republicans are crazy. Let me just assure you that the opponents that they're running against in the primaries are truly radical individuals. And I can assure you that we would much rather have a Peter Meyer or a Jamie Herrera Butler than those who are running against them, who will not only bring the big lie with them to Congress, but grow the base of voters who are emboldened and therefore more dangerous. And so these are critical times for us to stand up and support these folks, and also to support the same kind of Democrats who have pushed back against radical, progressive and socialist policies, but have remained steadfast in protecting democracy, continued to work across the aisle to get big things done. Those folks deserve our support as well, and that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's a great way to kind of wrap up that conversation. But January 6th is a very, very heavy occasion. I know it was kind of emotionally draining for me working through it. Obviously we're putting out a bunch of content and things, which if you haven't seen, we did a great RAM chat with Representative Abigail Spanberger. We talked about it. Miles Taylor talked with her about it. You can find that on our YouTube page. And we put out a video commemorating the occasion, which you can also find on our YouTube page. But before we sign off, Joel, I just want to ask you, what's something on a positive note, what's something that gives you hope going forward for January 6th, 2023?
Well, I alluded to it earlier. There is a huge number, millions, tens of millions of us in this country who do believe in the foundations of our democracy, who reject both the big lie and extremism in every form. And we're not only organized, but we're organizing, and our strength is growing. I am encouraged by everything from those who have been donating to our organization, who want to get involved, who want to be leaders in our various state organizations where we're supporting our renewers. These people are out there, and they are just like you. And so that gives me great hope that we're not done. There is much work ahead. But there's a lot of us, and there is strength in numbers. We just need to make sure that we use our voices to continue to both bring the temperature down and speak truth. And that does give me a lot of hope.
Well said. Well said. Well, just real quick plug for everyone. We have a RAM chat coming up. It will be with Bill Gates, not the tech billionaire, but the Maricopa County Commissioner of Elections. And as I said earlier, you can find previous RAM chats, including that with Abigail Spanberger from yesterday, on our YouTube channel, as well as all of our other videos. Thank you so much for tuning in. Joel and I are going to be doing Friday flannel panels a lot. So make sure, keep your eyes out, put on your flannels on Friday, and join us for some more deep political dives into the issues facing us. Thanks
Awesome.
again, Joel.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.